All right, let's take a look at Capture One Pro and see what it has to offer when compared to something like Lightroom. So I've got Capture One running on this computer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open the window up. And the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about the interface and what you can do with the interface. Now, the nice and cool thing about Capture One is that you can actually customize the interface and do all kinds of things here, which you cannot do in Lightroom. So that's the first thing that you might find really useful and interesting, because here on the top, for example, you've got this navigational area here, and then you've got all these different features and functions within the software itself. So if you right click on this area, you can actually click customize, and you can add or remove objects that will make it easier for you to jump right into them. If I open one of these, then I can actually drag one of these into the interface. And at any point of time, if you feel like you want to go back, you can actually restore the default set. So this is one area where you can customize. Now, the next thing is you've got all these different modules. And as you can see, I've got one for capture, which is for shooting tethered. And the software is amazing at doing that, by the way, if you shoot with medium format and professional DSLR cameras. So if I don't do that, for example, in my case, I rarely ever shoot tethered, I can completely remove that, which is really cool. By just right-clicking this and saying remove tool tab, capture, it completely gets rid of that from this list of modules. So I can really keep this tidy and limited to what I personally use. So let's go ahead and reset the workplace. And that's another thing, is you've got all these different workplaces that you can apply, similar to what you can do in Photoshop. So if I say I want to go back to default, then it's going to reset back to how it was before. So let's take a quick look now at the library. Now, this is the first thing you will see when Capture One opens. You're going to see this library submenu here. And what you can see from here is you've got multiple options. You've got catalog and sessions. Now, one key differentiator here is that Capture One is really not meant to do the similar things that Lightroom can do in terms of file management. So in Lightroom, you can import as many images as you want, and you can put tens of thousands of images, and it keeps it all in that one database. On the other hand, the Capture One is really not designed to do the similar things. So you have these catalogs, and then you have sessions. And every time when you work on something new, when you import images, for example, you can create new sessions and catalogs. If I click on this plus sign, I've got this option to do either one. While you have some functionality for file management, it's really, like I said, not meant to compete with Lightroom's built-in functionality. It's really not as robust. But here I've got the ability, as you can see, I actually imported some images. There's 315 images that I imported from my hard drive into Capture One. And I actually have this folder view as well. So they're on the E drive photos. And what I can do now is I can click on these folders and it jumps right into this view. So by default, you're going to get this view. This is the image that is selected right now, and you can go through these different images by using the keyboard or the mouse, whichever way. And let's go ahead and pick this image and see what we can do with it. So I'm going to make a few adjustments to the image, but before I do that, let's talk about simple things like filters here. Now, this works similarly as the filters in Lightroom, where you can actually enable a filter and see how many 1-star, 2-star, and other images you have in the catalog. So in this case, I could say, well, I'm going to mark this as a 5-star image. And if I do, then as you can see right here on the bottom, it became 1. If I enable this filter, it's only going to show me those 5-star images. And the same thing applies to all these other criteria. And I could even go by dates and keywords if I manage keywords. Now, the changing of ratings and things like that, they're kind of similar in Capture One as in Lightroom. So you can use 1 to 5 to rank the images in terms of stars. And if I need to adjust things like color tags, I can do that from the image as well. So I can just right click the image and say color tag is going to be red, and that becomes a red color tag. As you can see, it just got added here. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and make a few simple edits. One thing that I want to clarify is that I do not want to make this a very comprehensive coverage of Capture One, because truth be told, there are so many things that you can do in the software. Actually, some of the capabilities are far beyond what you can do in Lightroom. So this is by no means a very detailed overview of all the functionality. But I just want to show you how easy some of the things are to achieve in software. So as you can see in this image, it's a little bit dark. I want to adjust the exposure. And one of the really cool things that Capture One can do that Lightroom can really not compete with is adjustments to the skin tones and selective adjustments in particular. So I want to demonstrate some of that here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to skip the tethering one. Color is the next tool here, and you can adjust things like white balance. But before I jump there, I actually want to fix exposure first. So I'm going to go to this exposure module, and I'm going to go ahead and adjust the exposure. So as you can see, this slider works very similarly as the slider in Lightroom. And the nice thing about this one is that you can see that there's a live histogram preview on the top. So if I move it way too much to the right and it gets overexposed, I can see the effect here. So I'm going to go ahead and just adjust the exposure just a little bit right there. And you've got the other options, again, similar to Lightroom, where you can adjust the contrast, brightness. You can see the effect. I would play with these and see what they do. Sometimes it can be just a little less responsive compared to Lightroom, but other tools are actually super fast here and they're very slow in Lightroom. So another area is in Lightroom, you've got the highlight and shadow recovery. Here it's under high dynamic range. So if I want to, for example, try to recover the highlight areas, you can see that by moving to the right, I can recover those highlight details here. I'm gonna go ahead and now adjust a little bit of the shadow areas so that, as you can see on the bottom here, it was a little bit dark, so I'm gonna boost it up just a little bit. So, you know, just to get started, I think that's not bad. I'm not gonna worry about clarity and structure, because especially for facial features, that might not work very well. And also, they give you all these different other tools within Clarity, so you can use Punch, Neutral, Classic, which kind of give different effects to both the clarity and the structure sliders. So let's go ahead and go into the color module where I can demonstrate some of the amazing capabilities of this software. So here you've got the ICC profile. It's reading that it's a D800E. Under white balance, you've got multiple options. So first, I can set the Kelvin manually, and let's see, that's way too blue, so maybe just around here. And then you can also adjust the tint as you can in Lightroom. So that looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and take a look at these three options here. We've got color balance, black and white, and color editor. Now these are similar to the HSL or the hue, saturation, and luminance features and black and white features that Lightroom offers. But there's so much cool stuff that you can do here that you cannot really do in Lightroom, and I'll demonstrate in a second. So first of all, this color balance is basically something that you can either apply to the master color. So if I start fiddling with this, as you can see, it actually changes the colors throughout the image. And this side is the intensity level, and this side is the color, different types of colors that I can apply. So I'm gonna go ahead and undo that. And then you can also go into the three-way. Now this works similar to the split toning because I've got the shadow, mid-tone, and highlight areas. So if I only wanted to adjust the highlight areas here, I can do that. So by increasing the intensity and then playing with these different colors, as you can see, I can actually change the look of the background. Now, I'm not gonna touch these too much. There's a lot of things you can do here, just like you can in Lightroom. The main cool feature here is the color editor, and that's something that I want to spend time on. So on the color editor here, you have three different tabs. You've got basic, advanced, and skin tone. And if I click on basic and click on this tool, I can actually pick any color that I want, and then it shows me the range of the colors that I selected, and I can adjust things like hue, saturation, lightness, and even the smoothness of how that gets applied. But the coolest feature that I really love here is the skin tone. So if I say, you know what, his face looks a little red, maybe I want to back it down a little bit in intensity, I can click on this pick skin tone correction, click on the area that I want to edit, and if I click on this view selected color range, as you can see, it's showing me what areas of the image are going to be impacted. So I've got some colors here that are going to be changed together with this skin tone. And that's really cool because I can actually do way more advanced stuff here than I can do in Lightroom. So if I say, you know what, I want to increase the smoothness and how that's going to get distributed, as you can see on the top, it's going to change that. So let's keep it there. And I could say, you know what, now I want to change the saturation levels, maybe desaturate it a little bit. And as I start desaturating it, as you can see, the effect is visible on the right side. I can go ahead and uncheck that, but that's something really cool because it allows you to isolate colors and see what specifically is going to be changed. So that's something that Lightroom I wish had, which it doesn't have. But the nice thing on top of that is that I can actually use this particular tool with a layers capability that Capture One has, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. So let's go ahead and make some changes here. I'm simply going to desaturate the skin just a little bit, and as you can see, I can actually pull these and I can expand that range. And if I say view selected color range and I start expanding that range, you can see more colors get selected. So this is really cool. I really love this feature right here. But let's go ahead and apply the changes only to his face and not to these areas. And that's something that you can actually do in the local adjustments tab. Now, this is something I really love about Capture One, something that Lightroom can come nowhere near to, because this allows you to make all the changes to the image without slowing things down. And that's the key. If you ever used Lightroom's adjustment brushes, they sometimes tend to be so slow. Once you start adding 1 or 2 layers, then things are just impossibly slow. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. And as you can see, I can just name it and I'll just call it face. And the adjustments that you can make on the layers, you can, by the way, make as many layers as you want. In this case, I only want to adjust the skin tone. So I'm going to go ahead and select face, and what you can do from here is you can, as you can see, the tool that's selected is pick skin color correction, which is really not going to do anything. So I want to draw a mask, and I'm going to select the right tool. And like in Lightroom, you can use the keyboard buttons to be able to increase the size or decrease the size here, but you can also click on here and you've got all these different options for size, hardness, and then different things like opacity and flow. So I'm going to go ahead and select this auto mask because that's one thing that I want to do is I want to paint this area and not paint anything else around it. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this brush just to his face. So let's go ahead and draw. And as you can see, as I'm doing this, it's actually not showing anything. And the reason why is because I haven't press the M key. That's what reveals the actual mask. And right now I'm in the brush mode, but if I select the erase mask, so if I went over in some of these areas here, which I can take a quick look and just focus in these areas here, I can just press the E button and that becomes the negative brush and I can just paint that out. Now the masking here works generally pretty well, but sometimes it will go over, especially in the areas where, like you can see, it did a pretty decent job here. But in other areas, if you see that it's not doing a very good job, then you can just repaint that. And the nice thing is you don't have to worry about constant adjustments like you do in Lightroom. And if you mess up, then you're gonna go into the slowdown mode. Here, there's no such thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom out. Now here's the thing, I'm gonna go ahead and hide that mask by pressing the M button. And this is the area that I can make adjustments. So obviously I can adjust things like white balance. So if I wanted to just play with the white balance on the face, as you can see, that's all possible through this tool. I'm gonna go ahead and undo that. Let's go into the most important one, which is I want to go into the color editor. And from here, I'm gonna go ahead and click skin tone. And again, this is the area that I selected, so it's only going to apply that mask to that skin tone. As you can see, I've got the colors range already selected. And if I now start making changes to it, although it's showing that all these different areas might be affected, in fact, if I'm going to go ahead and increase the saturation, for example, none of that is going to apply on his hand or these other areas. So that's a really powerful tool because it allows me to do very selective editing, and with all these capabilities, I can even if I do increase the range and say, you know what, I actually want to cover this whole area, no matter what color range I pick with this pick tool, I can still apply all these changes locally just to his face. That's a really powerful feature because then you've got all these other tools, like in Lightroom, for example, once you do the adjustment brush, you've got only one slider for noise. Well, here, if I said I want to do noise reduction, I can click on noise reduction and I've got all these available tools that apply only to that area. Or if I wanted to do selective sharpening, I selected his face, and if I said, well, I want to sharpen only his face, then I can do that very easily here by just applying sharpening on his face. And as you can see, it added right here to his face, never touched even his hair. So that's something that is truly powerful in Capture One that you would be struggling to make similar changes in software like Lightroom. So these are just some of the things you can do to a portrait. Let's go ahead and uncheck the view selected color range so that we're back to normal here. And I want to do another demo here using a different image. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my Jordan trip, and maybe actually this one is pretty decent. We have plenty of highlights here to recover, some shadow details to recover, but I want to show you how easy it is and how practical Capture One Pro is for doing things like dodging and burning, which I typically do in Photoshop. Now, what I'm going to do is, before we get there, I'm going to go ahead and click on exposure. Looks like I just want to maybe just boost up just a little bit of that exposure. I'm going to recover most of that sky by pushing that highlight to the right, and maybe just a little bit of the shadow details like that. So I could work further on this image, but I want to quickly show you some of these amazing adjustments that you can make to the image. So we're going to start with the local adjustments, and typically in Photoshop, I would fire up an image, then I would use my Wacom tablet here to make dodging and burning adjustments. So you can create two separate layers here. I'm going to call the first one dodge, and then press enter, create another one, call this one burn, and let's go ahead and select the brush. And with the brush, I can, like I showed you before, I can play with these different brush sizes and opacity levels. So let's keep that at 100 for opacity, and then hardness is down to 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply change the exposure, and let's just say we're going to up it up by 1/3 of a stop. And once I start working on this area here, it will obviously increase the exposure by 1/3 of a stop. And the same thing can be done with burn, which I can lower the exposure. So let's go ahead and start with dodge. But one thing that I need to make sure this time is I'm not going to select this auto mask, because I do not want to go through some crazy masking in this area. I just wanted to paint everything here. So let's just say I'm going to go ahead and maybe dodge this area here, make it a little bit brighter, and then burn the sky a little bit so that it's a little bit more dark. So what we'll do is select dodge, and I'm going to go ahead and start painting in the areas that I want to dodge. And as you can see, you can already see the changes as they're happening right there. As you can see, it's all getting much, much brighter. Now, this is obviously a pretty strong setting here, and normally I would never do dodging and burning this way, but it shows you the flexibility. So if I wanted to reduce the opacity, I can still reduce the opacity by just moving the slider with a brush. So if I apply new brush strokes, it will apply to that. Or if I say, you know what, that's a little bit too strong, I'm just going to reduce that exposure, and as you can see, it reduces on the areas that I highlighted. Now if I boost it up, you can see all of these areas that I actually missed, so I can work on those. Or like I said before, I can just press the M key, which will show me the mask, and I can just select all these areas that I wanted to select. So anyway, let's go ahead and hide that mask by pressing the M key. I'm going to lower this down, and that's our dodge layer. Now, the nice thing about this is that I can actually say, you know what, I want to also maybe increase the clarity here, and I can just boost up the clarity there, maybe just give it a little bit more structure just for that area, and it obviously doesn't touch any of this stuff here. So let's go ahead and do the burn layer, and for this one, we're going to reduce the exposure, so maybe reduce it by 1/3 of a stop. And the same thing here, and this time I'm just going to maybe reduce the opacity so that I'm just applying a very thin layer, and as I start painting it, as you can see, it's getting just a little darker. And normally I would do very subtle changes instead of kind of a quick and dirty changes that I'm making here, but you get the idea. So, and if I start painting over, as you can see now, I'm actually painting over the previous mask, and you know, the more I do it, the stronger it's going to get, and that's because of it's applying a separate layer on top of the existing one. But the nice thing is, if I said, you know what, I want to go back and erase that, I can actually do the same thing and maybe reduce the opacity of that and start erasing certain layers. Here it's 100% opacity, but if I go to the brush and say, you know what, I'm just going to erase it just a little bit, I can still do that here. So, which is really cool. And the nice thing here is that I can do this all day, no problems. It's not going to slow down. In comparison, Lightroom would be a total disaster if I tried to do this and try to do some fine tuning and maybe go into these little areas. If I start zooming in and looking at all these areas, Lightroom just starts getting bogged down really quickly. Here, I have no concerns like that. So this is really nice. Now let's go ahead and hide that mask. And these are just very quick and dirty adjustments, like I said. But if I wanted to do separate masking, if I wanted to apply to certain areas, maybe take these mountains and make them less hazy, that is certainly something that Capture One Pro allows me to do, which is really, really nice. Another big advantage that Capture One Pro has compared to Lightroom is that you actually have a lot more options when it comes to working with different layers. So in Lightroom, you only have, when you select something like an adjustment brush, you only have certain selections, and that's really it. You have no other options. Everything else that you had on the bottom kind of disappears. So for example, for noise reduction, you only have a single slider. Now, the huge benefit of Capture One Pro compared to Lightroom is that you have a lot more masking and layer options. So here, if I said, well, what if I wanted to transform the sky a little bit, maybe add a little bit more saturation to it? Well, I could either work on this existing layer, maybe tweak the white balance, add a little bit more saturation, or I could say, I'm going to create a brand new layer and call it sky, or maybe saturation of the sky, whatever I want to name it. And then what I could do is I could copy. So by right-clicking on this layer, I could say copy mask from, burn, and boom, it just copied that mask. By pressing the M key, I can see that mask. It just copied that mask to the sky layer, which is really cool because from here, I can just play with the saturation layer. And as you can see, that sky is getting a lot more boost. So one thing to keep in mind is that this is really powerful because you could create as many layers as you want and do all kinds of tweaks to the image without ever even taking it to Photoshop, something that you cannot do in Lightroom. Now, like I said earlier, my intent is not to go and deep dive into Capture One Pro because there are so many different features of the software. In fact, there are more features that I find in Capture One compared to Lightroom. What I want to do though is I just wanted to give you a preview of what's available. And if you've been using Lightroom like me and you've never ever tried something like this, give it a try. I personally discovered so much that I'm truly amazed by all the possibilities of the software. In fact, I could see how a photographer could use just Capture One without having to resort to a Lightroom and Photoshop combination. For me personally, for example, if I photograph, when I do landscapes, if I need to edit the landscape images, I usually resort to using both Lightroom and Photoshop. I start in Lightroom, make some adjustments, then go into Photoshop and do all these tweaks to the images. When in fact, I could do that from one software package like Capture One. Because if I can do all these selective dodging and burning and other adjustments to the image, why not? Why not just use one software? So the appeal is definitely there. I would certainly encourage you to take a deeper look at Capture One. Give it a try. I installed a 30-day trial on this computer and do the same. See what it offers for you.